That night, the wind swept through the empty streets, carrying the lingering chill of a winter not yet gone. Inside a small room, a dim golden light cast its glow upon Ethan's pensive face. His eyes gazed into the distance, as if searching for something long lost. Somewhere else, Lily stood before her wedding mirror, her fingers gently brushing against the fragile lace of her gown, her heart stirring with a feeling she could not name. They had once promised to stay together, but fate, or perhaps the deeper unseen part of their own unconscious, had led them down separate paths. CarlJung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps what we call destiny is nothing more than the voice of the darkness within, the part of ourselves we have never dared to face. The story I Want Us to Be Together is not merely a tale of sorrowful love, but the journey of two souls seeking the forgotten parts of themselves. For sometimes, love does not come to be possessed, but to illuminate the shadow within us. And only when we learn to let go do we truly understand what it means to be together. Part 1. The Love Letter. That morning, sunlight slanted through the classroom window, glittering upon the tiny dust particles floating in the air. The teacher's voice droned on, steady and monotonous, like an old clock ticking. But in the far corner of the room, Ethan Cole heard none of it. He leaned against his desk, his dreamy eyes fixed on the world outside, where the branches swayed gently in the wind. Someone might have said that Ethan was a rebel, a troublesome student whom every teacher had long given up on. Yet beneath that indifferent facade, there was something tender, like a small flame quietly burning in the dark. The only person Ethan observed throughout the lesson was Lily Evans, the brightest student in the class, gentle and composed. She always had the right answer, and she seemed never to stray from the path adults had drawn for her. Ethan, on the other hand, had nothing but poor grades, reprimands, and a heart that had yet to learn the language of its own feelings. Perhaps it was that very contrast that pulled him toward her. One afternoon, in a classroom still filled with the scent of chalk and sunlight, Ethan wrote Lily a letter. It wasn't elegant or poetic, just a few sincere lines. "When you smile, everything feels easier to breathe. I don't know if I deserve it, but I want to be with you." He folded the note, slipped it beneath her desk, and walked away, as if it were a reckless impulse. But in truth, it was the first time Ethan had ever dared to live honestly with himself. The next day, the letter was discovered. The teacher called Ethan to the front of the class, her voice stern. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you regret your actions?" The room fell silent. Someone snickered in the back row. Ethan bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. But when he lifted his eyes, they were filled with an unexpected light. "I don't regret it." Those 4 words silenced the entire room. No one laughed anymore. Even the teacher froze. Perhaps for the first time, everyone saw something real in his eyes. Something no lesson could ever teach: sincerity. That day, Ethan was punished. He had to write an apology and stand before the entire school. Yet, inside, he no longer felt ashamed, because in that very moment, he realized he had spoken the truest words of his heart. CarlJung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Human beings do not become wise by dreaming of light, but by daring to face their own darkness. For Ethan, that darkness was the fear of rejection, the feeling of not being enough, the long years of being dismissed and unseen. But when he said, "I don't regret it," he transformed fear into light, pain into truth. In Jung's view, that moment marked the beginning of individuation, the journey of a soul breaking free from the definitions of others to rediscover its true essence. Ethan, the boy branded as worthless, began that journey through what seemed like a foolish act, daring to love, to write, to be vulnerable. To Ethan, Lily was more than just a girl. She embodied his anima, the feminine, gentle, intuitive side of a man's soul. By loving her, Ethan's unconscious longed to reconnect with that part of himself, the realm of emotion, intuition, and the quiet faith in life's fragile beauty. Thus, the love letter was not merely a confession, it was a spiritual ritual, the rite of a heart finally learning to acknowledge itself. That afternoon, Ethan walked alone across the schoolyard. The wind rustled through the trees and dry leaves crunched beneath his feet. His heart felt both empty and light, perhaps because, for the first time, he had stopped running from his emotions. He had admitted that he loved, that he feared, that he existed, even if the world mocked him for it. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege of life is to become yourself." And Ethan began that privilege at the very moment he was called a mistake. Lily never replied to the letter. She only looked at Ethan with an unreadable expression, a mix of compassion, confusion, and somewhere within it, a faint glimmer of light. Perhaps she wasn't ready, but that no longer mattered, because the letter, whether discarded or kept, had fulfilled its purpose. It had awakened a sleeping soul. Years later, when everything had faded into the past, perhaps Ethan would still remember that morning, standing before the class, under countless gazes, and daring to say the words the world fears most. "I don't regret it." For those were not the words of a 17-year-old boy. They were the first utterance of a soul that had just touched the truth. And from that moment on, Ethan's journey, the journey through darkness toward light, had truly begun. Part 2. I Don't Regret It, narrative version. The morning light fell cold upon the schoolyard. A voice echoed through the speakers, calling one name, Ethan Cole. He already knew what awaited him. Each step toward the auditorium felt heavier, as if he were walking into judgment. Hundreds of eyes were waiting. Everyone had heard the story. That foolish love letter, written for Lily Evans, had been discovered. On the stage, the teacher's voice rang out, sharp and formal. "Ethan, do you know what you've done? Do you feel any regret?" The room was silent. He could sense the mocking whispers, the smirks from the back row, and beneath them all, Lily, pale, unmoving, her hands trembling in her lap. Ethan took a deep breath, and then he lifted his head and spoke softly, yet with a clarity that cut through the air like light through glass. "I don't regret it." The world stopped. Even the faintest sound disappeared. The laughter died. Someone dropped a pen, and in that stillness, something shifted. In that moment, Ethan was no longer the troublemaker, no longer the boy everyone had dismissed. He had become someone awake. When he spoke those words, it wasn't defiance, it wasn't rebellion. It was the voice of something deeper, something that had finally awakened after a long, silent sleep. He wasn't pretending to be brave. He wasn't trying to be right. He was simply telling the truth. CarlJung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly what Ethan did. He accepted the shame, the fear of ridicule, the clumsy tenderness of his own heart, all of it, as part of who he truly was. For years, Ethan had lived as the broken one, the boy everyone had given up on. He thought that if he stopped caring, if he hid his feelings, no one could ever hurt him again. But love for Lily, broke that armor apart. When he wrote that letter, he wasn't thinking of consequences. He was thinking, if I never say this, I might never truly live. And now, beneath that cold morning light, he stood there, bare, vulnerable, alone. But within that nakedness, he found something astonishing: freedom. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that morning, Ethan faced his darkness, and in doing so, turned fear into light. Lily looked at him, silent, but her eyes had changed. Something within her broke and bloomed, because she understood. Even if she could not return his love, she saw what few people ever see: the rare purity of honest courage. The hearing ended. Ethan walked out into the light. The voices behind him faded away. The sun touched his shoulders, and he felt both heavy and weightless. Something inside him had died. The boy who hid, but something else had been born. A new self, real and unafraid. As he walked home, the wind stirred the trees. Leaves rustled beneath his feet. He didn't realize he was smiling, because somehow, through shame and fear, he had discovered the quiet truth that only those who have lost everything ever learn. That when we dare to show our weakness, we find our strength. Jung called it the awakening of the self. Not loud, not glorious, just a deep, sacred stillness when the soul whispers, "Who am I?" Ethan didn't know philosophy. He had never read Jung, but when he said, "I don't regret it," he had already stepped onto that path. The path of those who dare to face their shadow. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of the clock. The fear had gone. Only Lily's face remained. He wondered, did she know? That he didn't regret it, not because he thought he was right, but because for the first time in his life, he had truly lived. Outside, the wind brushed against the window frame. Dry leaves whispered through the dark. He closed his eyes, and peace, gentle and strange, filled his heart. Perhaps for the first time, Ethan felt something like light. Not from the world outside, but a faint glow born from the darkness within. I don't regret it. 4 simple words, but they changed everything. His life, his vision, his soul, because from that moment on, he understood. To live truthfully, even if it hurts, is worth far more than living safely in disguise. And perhaps, deep within, Lily understood too. She never returned his love. At least not yet. But she carried those words in her heart, like a small, enduring flame. Years later, that flame still burned quietly, reminding her of the day she witnessed the purest form of courage. Their story didn't begin with romance. It began with truth. Because sometimes, love doesn't start with sweet words, but with the moment you dare to stand before the world, before your own fear, and speak the truest thing in your heart. That was how Ethan began his journey, not with a kiss, but with courage. And from that moment on, he was no longer a boy. He was awakening. Part 3. 2 Worlds Collide. After graduation, the paths of Ethan and Lily diverged. One led toward a city blazing with lights, the other into the dust and noise of construction sites. Lily received a full scholarship to a prestigious university in New York. She left the small town with a modest suitcase, carrying with her the hopeful eyes of her parents and a quiet promise whispered to herself, "I will become the person I've always dreamed of being." Ethan stayed behind. No honors, no clear plan. Only a pair of calloused hands and a faint belief that by staying, at least he could still be himself. In the years that followed, their lives moved along 2 completely different orbits. Lily studied among skyscrapers, where people spoke in the language of ambition, in speed, in efficiency, in dreams neatly packaged inside business cards. Her days were bright, structured, and filled with expectations. But sometimes, when night fell and the glittering city suddenly felt foreign, she remembered those foggy mornings in her hometown, where a boy once stood by the fence, smiling at her without saying a word. Ethan's life was a symphony of hammers and machines, the scent of iron and concrete dust clinging to his sleeves. Day after day, he worked himself to exhaustion just to pay rent and survive in a harsh world. Yet no matter how dry life became, there was still one untouched corner in his heart, where Lily's image quietly lingered, a soft trace of warmth flickering in the shadows of his mind. And then one day, fate opened its door, gently. Years later, they met again. Not at a reunion, not in some romantic coincidence, just in the middle of the city, where 2 roads happened to cross on a windy afternoon. Lily had just finished work, coffee in hand. Ethan stood under a scaffold, his shirt stained with dust. Their eyes met, only for a second. Yet it felt like a current ran through them. "Ethan," she gasped, surprised. "Lily." He smiled, his voice roughened by wind and time. That evening, they walked together. Their conversation was slow, cautious, as if they feared touching something too fragile. Lily spoke about life in New York, the sleepless nights, the successes that sometimes felt empty. Ethan talked about work, the rainy days spent hiding beneath steel beams, the old apartment room where even the wind could blow out the light. And yet, when they laughed, their eyes still shone as they once did. Soon after, they rented a small apartment on the edge of the city. It was barely enough for two. The walls were cracked and peeling, the window frames rusted, the pipes leaking. They bought second-hand furniture, a chair with a broken arm, a small table just big enough for 2 plates. But when they turned on the yellow light, the whole room glowed with an inexplicable warmth. "We have nothing," Lily said with a gentle laugh. Ethan looked at her, his voice low and hoarse. "No, we have a home." And it was true. They had everything. A space to breathe, to dream, to be silent together. In the mornings, Ethan woke early to brew coffee, letting Lily sleep a little longer. And on rainy nights, she would read aloud from her textbooks, her voice soft as the wind. They had no money, no certain future, yet every moment felt sincere, simple, and whole. But somewhere, their two worlds still collided. Lily carried within her the anxiety of someone who had lived too long in the light, always worrying about stability, about tomorrow. Ethan, on the other hand, feared losing the small freedom he had left. Some nights, they sat side by side saying nothing, only listening to the rain, tapping against the roof. They loved each other deeply, yet both were still wrestling with their own inner shadows. CarlJung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until we bring our unconscious to awareness, it will control our lives, and we will call it destiny." For Ethan and Lily, that destiny was the collision itself, between reason and emotion, between dream and reality, between light and shadow within each of them. They loved one another, but their unconscious selves were speaking. Through silences, through anger, through fleeting touches. Sometimes Lily would watch Ethan sleeping, his face dimly lit by the golden lamp, and she would realize he was not just the man she loved. He was a mirror reflecting the part of herself she had long forgotten, the free, instinctive, authentic self she had left behind at 17. And Ethan, whenever he saw Lily reading under the light, he felt something stir within him. Admiration mixed with pain. She was the embodiment of ideals, of the light he had always believed was out of his reach. But deep down, he knew that light was illuminating his darkness, urging him toward something higher than himself. Their love was not loud, not rushed. It was like two rivers meeting, turbulent at first, then gradually finding their rhythm together. Each morning, they learned to understand each other a little more. Each night, they learned to forgive the parts of one another still incomplete. One night, as rain fell outside the window, Ethan whispered, "I used to think I wasn't good enough for you." Lily turned toward him, placing her hand on his chest. Her voice was soft but steady. "You never had to be good enough. I just needed you to be real." And in that moment, they both understood. Love is not about striving for perfection, but about allowing the other to see your imperfections, and to be loved because of them. The little apartment remained old, the pipes still leaked, but inside, two souls from different worlds had found something far more precious than luxury. Truth in love. For true love, as Jung once said, is the process of integrating the other into oneself. Love is not about dissolving into one another, but about recognizing yourself in the other, so that both may become whole. And so, in that small, worn-out room within a vast city, two worlds finally collided, not to destroy each other, but to awaken. From that collision, a new world was born. A world where light and shadow coexist, in love and in understanding. Part 4. The Mother's Warning. That afternoon, the sky over New York was softly gray. A thin veil of rain fell, like a sheet of mist wrapping the city in its own quiet breath. Lily held tightly onto Ethan's hand as they climbed the steps of the house where she had grown up. A luxurious, well-lit home, so orderly it felt distant. Ethan paused before the polished, wooden door, its surface so smooth he could see his own reflection. He smiled faintly, but inside, a quiet unease stirred. The door opened. A woman of commanding grace, Lily's mother, stood framed in the doorway, wearing an elegant gray dress. Her hair was neatly pinned, her face almost devoid of expression. Her eyes paused on Ethan's dusty shoes, then slid to the rough, calloused hands he tried to hide. "You're home," she said softly, a voice gentle, yet distant. Lily smiled, trying to sound natural. "Yes, Mother. I wanted you to meet Ethan." Ethan extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am." The woman nodded politely, then stepped aside to let them in. Dinner that evening unfolded in silence. The soft clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed rhythmically, like the ticking of a clock. Lily's father said little, occasionally asking perfunctory questions while her mother watched Ethan with a gaze that mixed curiosity, judgment, and faint pity. "What do you do for a living?" she asked. "I work on a construction site," Ethan replied, his voice calm, steady. "A laborer." "For now, yes. I hope to advance as I gain more experience." Her mother smiled faintly. "I see. But my daughter, she's worked very hard for a stable life. You know, love doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. If he can't build a life for you, love won't be enough." The air thickened. Lily froze, her lips trembling slightly. Ethan said nothing. He placed his fork down gently, his eyes fixed on the teacup before him. Those words, soft yet sharp, cut into him like a blade through the fragile skin of his pride. After dinner, they left the house. The night air was bitterly cold, their breaths fading into the dark. Lily grasped his hand, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. My mother didn't mean to offend you." Ethan smiled, a sad smile, heavier than silence itself. "It's all right. She's right. Love doesn't pay rent. Love isn't enough." They walked down the empty street. The yellow light stretched across the pavement in long, broken lines. The distant sound of traffic dissolved into the wind, leaving only the soft rhythm of their footsteps and the quiet beating of two hearts. Lily said nothing more because deep down she knew. Her mother's words, cruel as they sounded, were the very fear she had always carried, that their love might not survive reality. That night, Ethan returned to his small rented room. He sat by the window, looking out at the city towers, their lights flickering against the sky like fires of a world he'd never belonged to. Her mother's voice replayed in his mind, cold and merciless in its truth. Love doesn't pay the bills. He understood then that Lily's world was built upon rules and security, while his, of sweat, dust, and faith, depended on a fragile hope that effort alone could be enough. But tonight he realized, sometimes effort isn't enough. CarlJung once wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." And that night, the world told Ethan exactly who he was, a dreamer whose love, however genuine, seemed small against the hard edges of reality. He clenched his fists, feeling the sting of anger and humiliation rise within him, not toward Lily's mother, but toward himself. For the first time, he saw the distance between them, not in their hearts, but in their worlds. Jung once said, "There's no coming to consciousness without pain. There is no awakening without pain." And in that moment, Ethan felt the ache of a soul beginning to mature. He realized that love, if not strong enough to stand within the world, would be swept away like a dry leaf in the wind. Yet beneath that sting of pride and wound of rejection, something began to glow, a will to prove himself, not to her mother, not to the world, but to himself. He wanted to show that love was not a dream, but a force capable of creation, if one was brave enough to make it real. He remembered Lily's eyes during dinner, tearful yet unwavering. She didn't need him to be wealthy. She only needed him not to give up. And in that moment, he understood. Her mother's warning, though painful, was a catalyst, forcing him to confront his deepest fear. Because in Jungian depth psychology, the mother is not merely a person but an archetype, a symbol of both protection and limitation. The mother in this story was the great mother, the one who nurtures yet binds, who offers safety yet enforces order. She represents the rational, structured world where everything must have its place, its value, its security. When Ethan stepped into that house, he wasn't just facing a woman. He was confronting an entire collective force of the unconscious that asked him, "Do you have the strength to survive in my daughter's world?" Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The mother archetype forms the foundation of the unconscious. She is both the light of creation and the darkness of destruction." The mother archetype is the foundation of the unconscious, both the light that gives life and the darkness that devours it. Her words, therefore, were not merely a rejection. They were a test, a rite of passage. They challenged Ethan to break beyond his own limits, to evolve into wholeness. The night deepened. Rain continued to fall outside the window. Ethan stood staring at his hands, the calluses, the scars, the marks of labor. He thought to himself, "If the world needs proof, then I will create it. Not to buy Lily's love, but to prove that real love can become a creative force, not just the fantasy of dreamers." The next morning, Ethan returned to the construction site earlier than usual. The sky was gray, the wind sharp, cutting through his skin. Yet there was something different in his eyes now. A quiet but steady fire. He knew he had to go further. He had to leave the comfort of the familiar. He had to find a new path, because sometimes it is the words that hurt us most that open the door to our becoming. And perhaps, without that night, without those cold, brutal words, Ethan might never have understood that true love is not just an emotion. It is the journey of becoming the strongest version of oneself. As CarlJung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege of life is to become your true self." And for Ethan, that journey, through pain, rejection, and the cold gaze of the mother, was the beginning of awakening. Part 5. The Weight of Reality. After that night at Lily's house, Ethan threw himself into work as if it were a form of salvation. He worked relentlessly, mornings on the construction site, nights taking extra shifts. His hands bled, his shirt was always soaked with sweat. He believed that if he worked hard enough, he could change everything: the contempt in others' eyes, the distance between him and Lily, and even the boundaries the world had drawn around them. Before dawn, he would already be awake, carrying a cold lunchbox and a cheap roll of bread. All day long, he stood on scaffolds, facing the biting wind and the metallic dust, surrounded by the roaring of machines and the harsh shouts of supervisors. Ethan wasn't afraid of hardship. He was only afraid of being looked down upon. He wanted to prove that his love wasn't some naive dream of youth, but a promise built from sweat and the labor of his own hands. Yet destiny never yields to those who think they can conquer it through effort alone. One heavy gray afternoon, the site closed early. Something was off. The office was locked, the manager was gone, his phone switched off. Then the news spread. The contractor had fled, taking with him the workers' wages for the past several months. Ethan was stunned. In his pocket remained only a few coins, and in his heart, a hollow pit of cold despair. All the sleepless nights, the trembling mornings in the wind, the calluses on his palms, none of it meant anything anymore. He sat by the roadside, watching the sun set behind the distant towers, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly small. CarlJung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And Ethan was walking through that pain, the pain of a soul crushed beneath the weight of reality. That night, he returned to his small room on the city's edge. The walls were stained, the light weak, glimmering across unpaid bills scattered on the table. The sound of rain outside the window was like the echo of a breaking heart. Ethan sat down and opened a small notebook Lily had once given him. Inside was a line written in blue ink. "You don't need to be perfect, Ethan. You just need to stay true." The handwriting trembled slightly, soft, like a memory. He placed his hand on the page, and tears fell. Hot, bitter, unstoppable. He thought of Lily, her smile, her gentle voice, the evenings they cooked together under the warm yellow light. He had once believed that with enough effort, he could give her a future. But now, all he had left were debts, unemployment, and a love that was slowly becoming a burden. He wondered silently, can love survive the storm of reality? CarlJung wrote in The Red Book, "There is no rebirth without a dark night of the soul." And that dark night had come for Ethan. In the days that followed, he searched everywhere for work, but every site was full, every factory was cutting back. He walked for hours through the noisy streets, then collapsed on the curb, watching people pass by as if they belonged to another world. He felt invisible. In Jungian psychology, this is the stage of the shadow, the darkness of the soul. Ethan had not only lost his job, he was facing the weakest part of himself, the part he had always denied. He had believed himself to be strong, defiant, capable of fighting fate with bare hands. But now, when he had nothing left to lose, he understood. True strength is not the ability to always stand tall, but the courage to face ruin and not turn away. One evening, Lily came. She stepped quietly into the damp little room, placing a small bag on the table. A few loaves of bread, some money, and a wool scarf she had knitted long ago. Ethan looked up, his eyes hollow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I could take care of you. But it turns out I can't even take care of myself." Lily sat beside him and shook her head gently. "I never needed you to be strong," she said. "I just needed you not to disappear." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time he saw in her eyes not only love, but something deeper, understanding. The kind that only those who have suffered together can share. He said nothing, only held her hand. In silence, they sat together, listening to the rain tapping against the window. Outside, the world was still cold, but inside, something had begun to mend. CarlJung once said, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. To face one's shadow is to see one's true light." And that night, Ethan saw his, not the light of success or triumph, but the small, steadfast glow of resilience, the light that appears only after all illusions have fallen away. The next day, he started again. He no longer dreamed of becoming a hero. He took small jobs, fixing roofs, carrying bricks, doing whatever he could. He worked not to prove anything, but simply to live, to exist in truth. Each morning, as sunlight streamed through the cracked window, he remembered Jung's words from memories, dreams, reflections. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And now, amid the dust of life, Ethan was beginning to understand. He was no longer the dreamer who tried to prove his worth through exhaustion. He was learning to live with his wounds, without hiding them, without shame, because he knew that these cracks were not flaws, but the openings through which the soul grows. The love between him and Lily, though tested by the storms of life, did not fade. It no longer burned like the fire of their youth. It had become quieter, deeper, steadier, like a faint light in the dark, enough for two souls to find their way to each other. In the end, Ethan realized, love is not a miracle that erases reality, but a small flame that helps us endure it. And sometimes, just to keep that flame alive, through the cold rain, through the darkness of the world, is already a miracle. Part 6. The Hard Choice. That winter came early. The wind howled through the bare streets, carrying a chill that crept into every crack and window. In the small room, beneath the dim glow of a yellow lamp, Ethan sat still at the table, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the empty air. On the table lay a handwritten letter, brief, unadorned, yet heavy with the weight of destiny. It was a job offer from a distant uncle in Alaska, installing wind turbines. The pay was good, but the work was perilous. If he accepted, he could pay off his debts, rebuild his life. But the price would be leaving Lily, leaving the city, leaving the love he had guarded with all his heart. Lily sat across from him in silence. She had heard him talk about the job. She had seen that spark in his eyes, the light of a man who finally saw a way out. But she had also seen the fear behind it, the fear of losing everything. "Are you really going?" Her voice trembled, like the faint vibration of a string just plucked. Ethan looked at her, his eyes tired, yet resolute. "I have to, Lily." "Please don't," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You've suffered enough. We can start over here, even if we have nothing." He took her hand, his fingers cold as stone. "If I stay," he said softly, "you'll have to live with a man who no longer believes in himself. I can't let that happen." In that moment, they stared at each other in silence. Between them stretched a distance not measured in steps but in fate. Ethan knew that if he left, he might lose her forever. But if he stayed, he would lose himself. CarlJung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. There is no awakening without pain." And that night, beneath the faint light and the sound of rain tapping on the window, Ethan understood. Their love had reached the threshold where it was no longer comfort, but the trial of a soul. Lily rose from her chair, walked over to him, and held him tightly, as if to preserve one last trace of warmth. "Promise me," she whispered, "that you'll come back." Ethan nodded slowly, holding her close. He wanted to speak, to say 1,000 things, but no words came. Only the sound of their hearts, fast, frantic, and filled with despair. The next morning, the sky was still gray, mist blanketing the streets. They walked together to the train station. Lily kept her eyes down, her hand gripping his. When the train's whistle echoed through the cold air, Ethan turned and said softly, "Don't cry. It's only goodbye for now. Promise me." He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I promise." Then he stepped onto the train. The wheels rolled along the tracks with a sound like time itself, heavy, irreversible. Lily stood motionless, watching until his figure faded into the thick fog. She didn't know when he would return, or if love could survive the long winter of distance. She only knew that if love was real, one must learn to let the beloved go. CarlJung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And in their love, that reaction had already taken place, quiet, fierce, and irreversible. Lily had learned to love without holding on, and Ethan had learned to walk away, even with a bleeding heart. On the long train cutting through snow-covered mountains, Ethan sat in silence, gazing out the window. The pale sun glowed faintly, like the last shimmer of a fading dream. He closed his eyes, and Lily's image filled his mind. Her brown eyes, her gentle smile, her voice soft as wind. "If you don't leave now, we will never have a future." The words echoed in his mind over and over like a prayer. In that moment, Ethan realized he was not only leaving Lily, he was leaving behind the weakest part of himself. He was stepping into what Jung called the individuation process, the journey of separating from illusion to discover one's true essence. For sometimes, a person can only find themselves by letting go of what they fear to lose most. CarlJung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And Ethan knew that to claim that privilege, he would have to pay the price. Alaska was not merely a frozen land in the far north. It was a metaphor for the wilderness within the human soul, the place where one must confront fear, solitude, and the shadow of one's own being. That night, when the train reached the final station, Ethan stepped out into the blinding whiteness. The wind roared across the frozen plains, carrying the scent of loneliness and of beginnings. He lifted his eyes toward the pale sky, feeling small beneath the vastness of the universe. Yet within his chest, a small flame still burned. The flame Lily had left behind, a promise that love does not end with distance, but begins from it. Meanwhile, in the small room back in the city, Lily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain fall, listening to the wind rush past the rooftop. In silence, she touched the wool scarf Ethan had wrapped around her neck that morning. She knew that when he left, he wasn't just walking away from her. He was leaving behind his own fragility to become the man destiny had called him to be. And so, instead of fear, she whispered softly, "Go, Ethan. I'll wait for you." Jung once wrote in The Red Book, "To be whole, we must sometimes be broken." And in that white winter, two souls, separated by half a world, were breaking together so that one day they might be reborn in the true form of love. Ethan left. Lily stayed. But on a deeper level of the soul, they were still walking side by side. Through darkness, through loneliness, through the pain of parting, moving toward the same destination. The growth of the soul. Part 7. The train station. Goodbye snow had fallen all night, thick and silent like a white blanket laid over the city. The train station glowed through the misty cold. Pale yellow lamps cast long trembling shadows across the snow. Ethan stood there, an old suitcase by his side, his hand gripping Lily's tightly. They said nothing, only their faint breaths mingling in the frosty air, while the distant loudspeaker echoed softly, as if time itself were calling them apart. "Ethan," Lily whispered, her voice so faint it seemed to dissolve into the falling snow. "Are you sure about this?" He looked at her, his eyes weary, yet clear. "This time," he said quietly, "I'm not joking." A simple sentence, light as air. Yet, it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. He bent down and kissed her forehead. It wasn't rushed, nor did it promise anything. It felt like a ritual, as if he were carving her image into his heart before destiny pulled him away. CarlJung once wrote, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain. There's no awakening that does not pass through pain." In that moment, amid the cold air and the white snow, Ethan understood he was crossing an invisible threshold between dreamy love and hard reality, between youthful innocence and the maturity that comes with loss. The train whistle pierced the air, long and sharp. The steel serpent slithered through the mist, breathing clouds of white smoke. Lily tightened her grip. She didn't cry. She only looked, her eyes bright, as if trying to capture everything. His face, his voice, his warmth, all the things she knew she was about to lose. Ethan squeezed her hand one last time, then let go. "Believe," he said softly, "that sometimes leaving is another way of staying." The door closed. Lily stood still, watching. Her hair was damp with frost. Snowflakes clung to her coat, melting into tiny drops of water. She didn't notice she was trembling. Not from the cold, but from the quiet shattering of her heart, breaking into pieces so light that even the wind could carry them away. The train began to move, slowly, heavily. The wheels screeched against the rails like the sound of time sliding forward. Through the window, Ethan saw Lily's figure fading into the smoke until only the vast whiteness remained. He wondered if that image, the girl standing in the snow, silent, not crying, would be the last memory he carried of her. CarlJung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Ethan and Lily had met, loved, hurt, and now they were transforming. They were no longer who they once were. Their love, though divided by distance, was quietly changing form, from passion to understanding, from possession to release, from dependence to freedom. Lily stayed there long after the train disappeared, Snow kept falling, fine as ash. She lifted her face to the sky, breathing in the cold. And in that moment, she understood. Ethan wasn't just leaving her. He was leaving behind the weaker part of himself, the part that needed love to feel worthy. And perhaps she was doing the same. This separation, though painful, was the lesson their souls needed to grow whole. CarlJung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Lily no longer searched for Ethan in the world outside. She found him within, where memory was not sorrow but light. Night fell. The station grew empty. Lily sat on the wooden bench, her hand resting on the spot where he had stood. It was still warm, a small trace of life in the freezing air. She closed her eyes and heard his voice in her mind. "This time, I'm not joking." And she smiled. Far away, in the train car rolling through the mountains, Ethan gazed at the snow-covered peaks. He imagined Lily's face, her hand holding his back at the station. His heart felt heavy, yet strangely peaceful. He understood now. This train wasn't only carrying him to Alaska, but through the shadowed landscape of his own soul. For in the journey of a human being, as Jung wrote in the Red Book, to be whole, we must sometimes be broken. When dawn came, the world was still blanketed in white. Ethan looked out the window at the soft morning light. He placed his hand over his heart, slow, steady, real. Inside, Lily remained, not as a longing, but as a part of himself, the part he would carry wherever he went. And far away, in the city, Lily opened her eyes after a sleepless night. The light streamed through the window, falling upon her cold hands. She knew that though they were worlds apart, on a deeper level of the soul, they were still walking together. Because true love, as Jung once said, never ends. It only transforms. It no longer clings to the need to be together. It becomes the delicate thread connecting two souls that are growing into wholeness. And so, amid the endless white, as the train carried away the last remnants of youth, Ethan and Lily, each in their own way, began the journey of becoming themselves. Part 8, 10 years apart. 10 years passed, like a single, long breath. The city had changed, and so had they. Only memory, though dusted by time, still lingered somewhere, quietly, between the folds of two souls who once loved as if it were their final purpose. Lily now lived amid the glitter of Manhattan. Each morning she slipped into elegant work dresses and entered the elevator of a towering glass building, where the lights reflected off a face that no longer bore the softness of the girl she once was. She had become the woman the world admired, strong, confident, accomplished. But at night, when her apartment fell silent, she would see in the mirror a pair of weary eyes searching for something far away. Half a world away, in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, Ethan lived a very different life. He was no longer a man of the city, but a man of the wind. Each day he climbed towering wind turbines. Surrounded by the roar of the storm and the sting of snow, he lived in a small wooden cabin with only a fire and the gray sky for company. At night, when the blizzards quieted and the world turned still, he sat by the window with a cup of hot tea, staring out into the vast cold. And in the wind, he still saw Lily's face, faint, distant, but never gone. CarlJung once said, "Time is a child playing, moving pieces on a board. The kingly power is a child's. Time, innocent and cruel, moves the pieces of our lives with a careless hand." For Ethan and Lily, time did not destroy their love. It merely changed its shape, turning them from dreamers into souls who had walked through both fire and snow, learning to understand themselves. In the early years, Lily thought she had forgotten. She buried herself in work, building her career, believing that if she kept busy enough, her heart would stop remembering. But sometimes, in long meetings, or when an old song drifted from a cafe, or when snow crunched under her heels, she would stop frozen and realize that memory never dies. It only sleeps. Ethan was different. He didn't try to forget, But he didn't try to remember either. In Alaska, where every breath tasted of cold, he lived in a silence known only to those who had lost what mattered most. He worked until his body ached, until exhaustion left no room for sorrow. Yet every night, in his dreams, he found himself again at that snowy train station. Lily standing there, her eyes calm, the snow falling like it did that day. CarlJung once wrote, "What you resist persists. What we try to suppress only roots itself deeper." Both had tried to move on, and in doing so were pulled back, as if their souls were still in quiet conversation somewhere beneath consciousness. One winter night, as snow blanketed the streets of Manhattan, Lily left her office late. She walked through Central Park, where streetlights shimmered on the frozen lake. She stopped, tilted her head toward the sky. Snow fell, soft, slow, silent, just like it had 10 years ago. And she smiled. The pain was gone, replaced by a tender peace she couldn't name. At that same moment, in Alaska, Ethan stood among the wind turbines, the icy wind cutting across his face. He looked up at the night sky, a sea of stars, and a thought struck him. Somewhere beneath this same sky, Lily was seeing these very stars. And in that instant, the miles between them dissolved. CarlJung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Ethan and Lily had met, loved, and parted, and now they were living through the transformation that follows. Their love was no longer an emotion. It had become an archetype, a symbol in the soul where light and shadow meet. To Lily, Ethan was the shadow, the wild, instinctual, authentic part of her she had suppressed to fit the world's expectations. He was the part she feared, and the part that made her feel most alive. To Ethan, Lily was the anima, the sacred feminine, the light he turned toward whenever he wandered through darkness. 10 years passed, no letters, no words, not even names spoken aloud. Yet, in the unconscious, they still met, at that snowy station, where the train never left, where the unsaid words still floated in the cold air. CarlJung once wrote, "The soul becomes whole only through the reunion of opposites. The soul attains wholeness only when opposites reunite. Perhaps the distance was never meant to make them forget, but to make them complete, so that when they meet again, if fate allows, they can love not from fear or longing, but from awareness." One morning, as the pale sun rose over the gray Alaskan sky, Ethan stood by the window, light spilling across his face. He smiled and whispered to himself, "Lily." At that same moment, in Manhattan, Lily lifted her coffee, looking at the first snow of the season. Her heart stirred, faintly, like someone far away had just called her name. Distance no longer mattered, because as Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is fate. The experience of their connection is beyond time and place. The meeting is fate, but the connection between souls that belongs beyond time and space. And so, though they lived in different worlds, Ethan and Lily still belonged to something far deeper than love. A recognition that once two souls truly meet, they are never separate again. Part 9. The Call. Snow fell again over Manhattan. The streetlights stretched long, pale streaks of gold across the wet pavement. People hurried past, their breath dissolving into the cold air like smoke. Lily walked slowly through the street, her wool scarf wrapped tight around her neck, her heart heavy with a strange feeling. Not exactly sorrow, but something like a long asleep memory quietly stirring awake. She had just finished work. After a long year-end meeting, Lily turned down a small street by the park, the same street she used to walk when she was 17, and there, among the sea of unfamiliar faces, she saw someone she recognized, her old literature teacher, the man who, years ago, had unknowingly read Ethan's love letter aloud in class, turning a boy's clumsy confession into the first scar on her heart. He looked older now, hair silver, but his eyes were still kind. He smiled when he recognized her. Lily Evans. It's been a long time. She smiled back, though faintly trembling. They exchanged polite words and parted ways at a snow-covered intersection. As she walked away, her chest tightened. She didn't know why, but suddenly she heard Ethan's voice again in her mind, rough and young as it once was, saying, "I don't regret it." That night, Lily's apartment was unusually quiet. Outside, the city buzzed with traffic and lights, but inside, only the clock's rhythm filled the air. She sat by the window, watching snowflakes fall as slowly as memories. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. A number appeared on the screen, Ethan's. She thought she had deleted it years ago, yet her fingers dialed it anyway, as if some hidden part of her had always known this moment would come. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then on the 4th, a voice, deep, distant, familiar. "Lily." She closed her eyes. "Ethan." Her voice barely a whisper. "I'm getting married." On the other end, wind howled, the wind of Alaska, cold and far, blowing through the receiver like the breath of memory. Ethan was silent. So was she. Between them, the distance of 10 years suddenly shrank into a single heartbeat. "The wedding," she continued, her voice shaking. "It will be just like we once imagined. White dress, flowers, music, lights. Only you won't be there." Silence, long, heavy. Both could hear the other's breath. No blame, no anger. Only the quiet presence of 2 souls that had gone too far to return, yet still beat with the same rhythm. CarlJung once said, "The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow." And that night, across the distance of thousands of miles, Lily wasn't just calling Ethan. She was calling the shadow within herself, the part she had buried under layers of reason, duty, and the role society had written for her to play. Ethan remained silent. She thought he might have hung up. Then his voice came, hoarse, tired but gentle. "I know. And I'm happy for you, Lily." Tears fell onto her hand. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "I tried to forget you," she said. "But maybe some things can't be forgotten." Ethan laughed. A dry, fragile laugh like wind hitting glass. "I tried too. But somehow, you're still there, in every winter." She said nothing, because she understood. They no longer belonged to each other, yet they could never truly part. Between them lay an invisible thread, unseen, unbroken. CarlJung once wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." Perhaps their love was like that too. Neither right nor wrong, simply something that was a secret of the soul, a place where they had learned to love, to lose, and to let go. "Ethan," Lily whispered, "are you happy?" He paused for a few seconds. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm at peace." "That's enough," she replied softly. "I'll try to be too." He drew in a breath. "If you can promise me one thing, Lily. Promise me you'll love someone. Not to forget me, but because you deserve to be loved." Lily smiled through her tears. "I promise." She heard him chuckle faintly, a faraway sound, fading into the wind. Then the line went dead. The room fell silent again. Lily sat still, staring at the glowing phone screen, yet her heart felt lighter than ever. The call had lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. She hadn't called to retrieve the past, but to release it gently, without bitterness. CarlJung once wrote, "Only that which is really ourselves has the power to heal us. Only what truly belongs to us can heal us." And that night, Lily touched that truth again. Not Ethan, but herself. She stepped out onto the balcony. Snow was falling, covering her hair and shoulders. Somewhere beneath the same sky, Ethan was perhaps watching the snow too. They were no longer lovers, yet they were still 2 souls sharing an eternal memory. CarlJung once wrote in The Red Book, Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Lily understood. Their love had never truly been lost, because it didn't belong to the past. It belonged to the deepest part of her, the place that, no matter how many years passed, still held a small flame, not to guide anyone else, but to remind her that she had lived, had loved, had dared. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Then she closed the door, turned off the light. Darkness filled the room, but within her, there was light. No longer the light of pain, but of a soul finally reconciled with itself. And in that moment, she knew. This call was not the end of a love story, but the peace between her heart and fate. Part 10, The Promise. Ethan's laughter came through the phone, soft, husky, and warm, like a small flame flickering in winter. "Then wear sneakers, Lily," he said. "I'll come crash the wedding." On the other end, Lily laughed, a sound half laughter, half tears. In that instant, time seemed to fold in on itself. They were once again the boy and girl they used to be. Foolish, awkward, but loving, with pure hearts. "You're still the same," Lily said quietly, her voice trembling. "Still making me laugh when I can't." Ethan chuckled, his voice like wind brushing through a forest of snow. "Maybe that's the only thing I ever did right." A silence followed, tender, fragile. Only the wind howled outside, and the thin sound of breath crossed between them. "Let's meet," Lily said finally. "Just once. At the train station. The one from before." Ethan's reply came calm but strangely gentle. "One last time. No regrets." It was a quiet sentence, without promise or longing, yet it carried the gravity of destiny. Both of them knew. This wasn't a meeting to hold on, but a meeting to let go. CarlJung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. The greatest problems in life are not meant to be solved, only outgrown." And their love was the same. It didn't need a perfect ending. It only needed a final encounter, a place where the unspoken could finally be set free, like a last breath before the soul moves on. Lily set the phone down. The room fell silent. The yellow light above shimmered softly on her tear-streaked face. She smiled, a sad, tender smile, because at last she had said what needed to be said. In Alaska, Ethan sat in his small cabin surrounded by white night. The phone still glowed in his hand. He sat there a long time, listening to the echo of her voice, afraid to lose even its fading trace. Then, amid the cold and the storm, he smiled. Not a smile of pain, but one of rare peace. The calm of a man who had walked the long road of longing and finally understood. Not all love is meant to last, but every true love leaves a light within the soul. CarlJung once wrote in the Red Book, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. To face one's shadow is to discover one's own light." Ethan knew Lily was both his light and his shadow. She was the most beautiful part of his soul, and its deepest wound. And he, for her, was the echo of freedom, the memory she had to release to become who she was meant to be. Outside, snow thickened. Lily stood by the window, looking down at the street. People passing, car lights moving like small stars. For a moment, she thought she saw him, tall, wearing a thick coat, head bowed in the snow. She closed her eyes, and in her mind, she was back at the old train station. That station, where they once said goodbye, where Ethan once told her, "This time it's not a joke," was now their final meeting place, not to begin again, but to complete a circle. CarlJung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And they had been transformed. Lily was no longer the girl afraid of love. She had learned to see love as a mirror, reflecting the shadow within herself. And Ethan was no longer the reckless dreamer. He had become the man who could keep his promises, even when his heart bled. There, Love had changed form. It was no longer fire, but warm ash. No longer desire to possess, but gratitude for having touched. Carl Jung once said, "We don't really heal anything, we simply let it go." And that night, they both let go. Not of each other, but of the past. Of expectations, of what if, of the stories that once held them captive. Across two ends of the world, snow kept falling. In Manhattan, Lily set down her cup of tea, eyes distant. In Alaska, Ethan drew open the curtain, letting the cold wind in. They both looked up, at the same sky, from two different worlds. "See you, Lily," Ethan whispered. "See you, Ethan," she replied, though he could not hear. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order. And within the chaos of love, there is always an order of its own. When two souls have fulfilled their purpose in each other's journey, they are allowed to part, without anger, without sorrow, only with gratitude." That night, Lily no longer cried. She simply smiled, thinking of their promise at the train station. Whether they would meet again or not, it no longer mattered, because Ethan was already within her, a part of her soul no wind could ever erase. And somewhere far away, in the endless field of white, Ethan looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'll keep my promise." He didn't know if he had enough time to reach that station again, but he knew he would go, even if it meant walking through a storm. Because a promise born from the soul is not something to keep. It is something to live. And that is how they loved, for the last time. Not with an embrace, but with the promise of awakening. Part 11. The Storm. The wind began to rise by afternoon. Across the Alaskan sky, dark clouds gathered, heavy, cold, and foreboding. Ethan stood atop the windfield, watching the turbine blades turn slowly under the pale light of dusk. He knew a storm was coming. Not an ordinary one, but the kind locals called the White Death. He pulled his coat tighter, his frost-bitten hands gripping the metal railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. Snow began to fall, thin and light as ash. But within minutes, the wind lashed harder, swirling the flakes into thick, blinding waves that erased every trace of the horizon. Ethan hurried down. His footprints sank deep into the snow, only to vanish behind him a moment later. By the time he reached the small cabin, the storm had already struck. The wind roared like the cry of an ocean. Windows rattled violently, snow seeping through every crack. Ethan dropped his bag, rummaging for his phone. The screen lit up in the dark room, reflecting his face. Older, wearier, yet still carrying a faint light of something unextinguished. Outside, the world blurred into white. He knew that if the storm didn't pass, no one would reach this place for a long while. And in that fragile space, where the line between life and death thinned, one image came to him clearer than anything else: Lily. He remembered her voice from their last call, warm yet sorrowful. "Let's meet again, one last time." He hadn't said goodbye. He hadn't kept his promise. His fingers trembled as he opened the messaging app. The blue glow of the screen reflected in his tear-bright eyes, wet from melting snow. He typed slowly, each letter like a heartbeat struggling to continue. "If I live, I'll marry you." He was about to press send. Then his hand dropped. The cold bit deep into his skin, numbing all feeling. The phone slipped, falling into a thin layer of snow on the floor. The screen remained lit, the words still there, unsent, suspended, just like him caught between two worlds. Carl Jung once wrote, "Death is not an end, but a goal. The life that ceases is a completed circle." Death, he thought, was not punishment, but return. Return to the deepest part of the soul, where no debts remain, no struggle persists, only the stillness of love. The wind howled harder, shaking the cabin to its frame. Snow seeped through the door, settling softly on his shoulders. His breath grew faint, but his eyes stayed open. In the dim light, he thought he saw Lily walking toward him, not of flesh and bone, but as a radiant figure within the white storm. "Lily," he called, though no sound left his lips. She smiled, gentle, like the last time they met at the train station. She didn't speak. She only looked at him, with eyes that held 10 years of forgiveness, love, and farewell. CarlJung once said, "The soul would have no rainbow if the eyes had no tears." And in that final moment, Ethan saw his rainbow, in Lily's gaze, in the warmth fading from his body, in the peace spreading through his heart. The storm raged on, but inside him everything was still. He saw the snow slow its fall, saw the sky open, saw himself standing somewhere beyond, bathed in a soft light. He looked down and saw his own body sitting there, motionless, eyes half closed, lips curved into a faint smile. The next morning, they found him, his body frozen, yet his hand still clutching the phone. On the cracked screen, the message remained, "If I live, I'll marry you." In Manhattan, Lily received the news that afternoon. She stood by the window, watching snowfall, her eyes hollow, unreadable. No one heard her whisper, but she knew what she said in her heart. She didn't cry. She only smiled faintly. CarlJung once wrote, "Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life." Their love was that paradox, both painful and complete, both ending and eternal. That night, Lily dreamed of Ethan. He stood in a vast snowy field, wind in his hair, eyes calm. She ran toward him, but the distance never closed. Just as she reached out, he dissolved into a white mist, leaving behind a soft glow, faint but everlasting. She woke, a tear rolling, onto her pillow, strangely warm. She knew then that he had kept his promise, not in this world, but in the deepest place of the soul, where time no longer exists and separation is an illusion. CarlJung once said, "What we call death is simply the crossing of the threshold." Ethan had crossed that threshold, not to leave her, but to become part of her, like light that no longer belongs to a single flame, yet continues to shine upon the world. The storm cleared. The sky was calm again. In the endless snow, a small stone marker stood, engraved with simple words, "If I live, I'll marry you." A promise unsent, yet fully kept in the silence of the soul. And somewhere, beneath the same sky, Lily whispered into the wind, "You did live, Ethan, because you never left my heart." Part 12. The message that arrived too late. The next morning, the Alaskan sun rose weakly after the storm. A faint golden light touched the snow-covered peaks. Still silent, cold. The rescue team followed fading footprints through the drifts until they found him. Ethan sat against a rock, his body frozen, eyes closed, lips curved into a dreamlike smile. In his hand, the phone still glowed faintly. The screen cracked from the frost. One unfinished line appeared upon it, simple, yet containing a lifetime. "If I live, I'll marry you." No one knew how long that message had waited unsent. Only when they carried him down the mountain and the signal returned did it finally go through. It traveled through the air, across miles of distance, across time, through the thin veil between life and death, to reach the woman he had once promised to return to. In Manhattan, the afternoon sun cast a pale glow over the city. Lily sat by the window, watching people hurry along the streets below. Life continued, steady, indifferent, as if nothing had been lost. Then her phone buzzed. A message appeared. When she read it, she froze. No sound came from her lips. The world fell utterly silent. She read it again, and again. "If I live, I'll marry you." The simple words struck her like a wave, breaking through every wall she had built for 10 long years. CarlJung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And now Lily understood. Their love had never vanished. It had merely changed form, dissolved into her being, becoming silence, becoming light, becoming the deepest part of her soul she once tried to forget. Tears fell quietly, not tears of loss, but of realization. She wasn't mourning Ethan's death. She was weeping for what he had taught her, that love does not need to be complete to be real. She looked toward the horizon. Sunlight glowed on the window pane, illuminating her fading reflection. In that moment, she felt his presence, not imagined, but real, in the air, in her heartbeat, in her breath. CarlJung once said, "Death is psychologically as important as birth, and like it, is an integral part of life." Ethan had not truly died. He had simply crossed into another form of existence, where the soul no longer wears a body, but continues to live, quietly, warmly, like a candle burning in the wind that never goes out. Lily placed her hand over her chest. Her heart beat strong, as if two rhythms had merged into one. Within that rhythm, she heard his voice, soft, distant, but clear as breath. "If I live, you did live," she whispered, "inside me." Outside, the season's first snow began to fall, slow, gentle, as though the world itself was blessing his departure. Lily sat there for a long time, understanding at last. Some promises are not kept by time, but by the eternity of feeling. CarlJung once wrote, "Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life." Their love was that paradox. It failed in the material world, yet triumphed in the realm of the soul. They no longer existed together, yet they were more united than ever. He had died, and in doing so, he had lived forever within her. When night came, Lily opened the message one last time. She smiled faintly, placing the phone over her heart. The screen dimmed, fading into her breath, as though the words had returned to where they truly belonged, her heart. CarlJung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And Lily awoke. From within her pain, she saw herself, not as the girl who waited, but as the woman who had learned to love without holding on, to remember without suffering. That night, she opened the window. The wind carried the scent of a melting snow. Across the gray sky, a single shooting star passed. Lily smiled and whispered, "You kept your promise, Ethan." No more tears. No more fear. Only peace, deep and soft, like the sleep of the soul. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The room felt strangely warm. Lily made herself a cup of coffee, opened her phone, and reread the message. For the first time, there was no pain, only something else, a perfect farewell. In this world, where love is measured by success and outcome, their love might seem a failure. But for those who have truly loved, they know. It never ended. It simply transformed. From a promise between two people into the voice of two souls who had found each other beyond time itself. And somewhere, in a place where the snow never melts, perhaps Ethan is smiling, watching that message finally reach its destination, light as breath, whole as destiny. A message that arrived too late, yet just in time to remind the world. True love does not need to live forever in the body. It only needs to live once in the soul.